They never expected a woman to rule. But fate doesn't ask permission, especially when it breeds ambition in royal blood. Born in 1102, Matilda entered the world not as a princess of comfort, but as a tool of strategy. Her father, King Henry I of England, had one obsession: legacy. And Matilda, his only legitimate daughter, was his backup plan when the unthinkable happened. His only legitimate son drowned in the wreck of the White Ship, a maritime disaster that claimed England's future in a single night. That night changed everything. To secure his crumbling dynasty, Henry bet on Matilda. But she wasn't just handed the throne, she was forged for it. At the age of 8, she was sent across the continent, betrothed to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V. In the grand courts of Germany, she became Empress, a title that would never leave her lips, no matter what England thought of it. While English barons scoffed at the idea of a woman ruling, Matilda learned the art of governance at the side of the most powerful man in Europe. She absorbed the language of emperors, the calculus of power, and the cold etiquette of court survival. She wasn't just royalty, she was steel wrapped in silk. When the emperor died in 1125, the empress returned to Normandy. Widowed, childless, and politically radioactive, but not broken. Henry I had her quickly remarried to Geoffrey Plantagenet, a man 10 years her junior. It was a cold match meant to unite Normandy and Anjou. Matilda hated it, but she understood her duty. What she couldn't have known was how quickly duty would turn to betrayal. Henry I, aging and increasingly desperate, summoned his nobles and forced them to swear an oath. Matilda would be their queen. No more debate. No more excuses. She was the heir. But as she stood beside her father, steel-eyed and silent, the men who bowed before her were already sharpening their knives. Oaths made before kings. Promises spoken on sacred relics. All forgotten the moment a woman dared to claim what was hers. In 1135, King Henry I died, suddenly, absurdly, from eating too many lampreys. His death triggered what he had feared most: a kingdom without a clear successor. Matilda, his named heir, was in Normandy, heavily pregnant with her third child. She had no army, no allies at court, no time. And so Stephen of Blois, her cousin, charming, opportunistic, and treacherous, seized his moment. Though he had sworn loyalty to Matilda twice, he rushed to England, bribed church leaders, and had himself crowned king in Westminster within weeks. It was a coup dressed in velvet. The crown now rested on the head of a liar. Matilda was stunned, but not defeated. This was more than a stolen throne. It was a public crucifixion of her legitimacy, a denial of her father's will, a betrayal by the very men who had once bowed before her. And yet she waited. She waited through childbirth, through the mockery, through the tightening of Stephen's grip on England, because she knew that vengeance, to be real, had to be earned. When her son Henry was safe and her strength returned, she began to move. Matilda crossed into England under the cover of loyalty. Her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, one of the kingdom's most skilled military minds, rallied to her cause. So did other nobles disillusioned by Stephen's weak rule and broken promises. Quietly, loyalty shifted. Armies formed. The drums of war began to beat. But this was no ordinary conflict. This was the first time in English history a woman had laid claim to the throne with force. To many it wasn't just rebellion, it was unnatural, monstrous. But Matilda didn't care. She wasn't trying to be loved. She was trying to be queen. By 1139, she landed in Arundel and declared war on Stephen. And just like that, England tore itself apart. Civil war engulfed the land. Brothers turned on brothers. Lords played both sides. Villages were burned, families destroyed. And yet, behind the chaos stood one woman, calm, calculating, regal. She wasn't here to beg for power. She had come to take it. It wasn't just a war. It was a slow unraveling of order, soaked in blood and silence. They called it the Anarchy, a kingdom without a king. Or worse, too. By 1140, England was no longer a nation. It was a battleground. Two rival courts now stood in opposition. Stephen's in London, fragile, corrupt, and fearful. Matilda's in the West, disciplined, defiant, and hungry. Neither side could fully claim the throne. Both sides acted like they already had. The people called it the Anarchy. But to Matilda, it was justice in motion. The war wasn't clean. It wasn't glorious. It was a slow rot. Castles were seized and burned. Crops torched. Churches defiled. Mercenaries were paid in blood and silver. Innocent villagers were crushed beneath the ambitions of nobles. The chronicles of the time speak plainly: Christ and his saints slept. But in the chaos, Matilda saw opportunity. In 1141, everything changed. At the Battle of Lincoln, her forces, led by her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, defeated Stephen's army. Stephen himself was captured and dragged through the mud like a fallen knight in a peasant's nightmare. England had no crowned king now. Matilda stood on the edge of history. She rode into London, not as a queen but as a victor. Her entrance was cold and symbolic, like a dagger drawn without a word. The throne was now within reach. All that remained was her coronation. And that's when it unraveled. Her demands were seen as arrogant. Her demeanor too commanding. The Londoners, many still loyal to Stephen or simply terrified of power shifts, turned on her. Riots broke out. Shops were shuttered. Stones were thrown at her retinue. Matilda, just days from being crowned, was forced to flee the city under cover of night. From triumph to exile in a single heartbeat. It was the curse of her strength. Matilda led like a ruler, not a woman. And medieval England was not ready for that. The very qualities that made her capable, pride, discipline, command, were seen as tyrannical because of her sex. Stephen, though imprisoned, still had allies. And Matilda's grip on the crown was slipping through her fingers. The anarchy dragged on. But something had shifted. She had tasted the throne. And though denied, she would not forget its feel. She had the king in chains. She stood at the gates of the crown. But in the end, England did not want a woman who fought like a man. Matilda had won a kingdom, almost. With Stephen imprisoned after the Battle of Lincoln, she ruled in all but name. Documents were signed, Matilda, by the grace of God, Lady of the English. She appointed officials, commanded armies, and prepared for coronation. But her reign was a storm wrapped in silence. There was no joy, no celebration, only suspicion. In Westminster, the archbishop hesitated. Nobles wavered. Even her allies whispered behind closed doors. They called her haughty, proud, cold. They didn't say she was unfit, they said she was unwomanly. The moment that shattered her momentum came swiftly. As Matilda arranged for her formal coronation in London, the city's mood soured. She had imposed heavy taxes on a starving city. She refused to play the game of pleasantries. She didn't flatter the lords and she didn't beg for favor. She ruled. And for that, the people revolted. Mobs surged through the streets. Armed resistance sprang from alleys. Fires were lit in protest. Matilda was forced to flee again, this time barely escaping with her life. She left the capital not as a queen, but as a fugitive wrapped in armor. Then came the counterblow. Stephen's wife, also named Matilda, rallied his remaining allies. A daring mission freed Stephen from captivity. In retaliation, Robert of Gloucester, Matilda's half-brother and greatest general, was captured during a failed escort. A trade was negotiated. Stephen for Robert. The king she had broken was restored. Her chance was gone. From that moment forward, Matilda fought a defensive war. No longer seeking the crown, only survival. She became a ghost queen haunting castles, escaping sieges, directing war by firelight. In one legendary escape from Oxford Castle, she disguised herself in white, slipping over frozen rivers under moonlight as snow fell. A royal fugitive, gliding through death's fingers. But even in retreat she did not collapse. Matilda returned to Normandy. She ruled there with intelligence and poise, no longer chasing the English throne for herself, but for her son. A child born of cold marriage and hot ambition, Henry Plantagenet. The throne had rejected the mother. But the mother would build a king. History remembers kings. But sometimes the one who shapes the crown never wears it. After years of civil war, bloodshed, and betrayal, Matilda relinquished her claim to the English throne, but not her purpose. She retreated to Normandy not in defeat but in strategy. England was not yet ready for a queen. But one day, it would kneel before her son. Henry Plantagenet, clever, fearless, and stubborn, was the product of her ambition and instruction. She raised him not as a prince but as a weapon. And when the time came he would not miss. In 1153, Henry crossed into England with an army of his own. The realm was exhausted. Castles lay in ruin. The nobles were fractured, the peasants starving. Stephen, older, weaker, and haunted, still wore the crown, but it meant little. He had lost a son, a court, and the will to fight. That year, Matilda's long game came to fruition. The Treaty of Wallingford was signed. Stephen would remain king until his death, but after that, Henry would rule. Matilda had done it. Not by force. Not by coronation. But by endurance. By refusing to vanish. By outliving the hate. In 1154 Stephen died, and Henry II ascended the throne of England, the first of the Plantagenet kings. His reign would mark the beginning of a dynasty that would shape medieval Europe for generations. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the Angevin Empire, Richard the Lionheart, the clash with Thomas Becket, all of it would trace its bloodline to a woman the throne had once denied. Matilda died in 1167 in Normandy. She never returned to rule in England. But on her tomb the inscription was precise. She chose her title carefully. Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. But history has been less generous. For centuries, Matilda was remembered as arrogant, harsh, unwomanly. Her achievements buried beneath the rubble of male rule. But now, in the light of time, her story resurfaces, not as a failure but as a foundation. She was the woman who fought a kingdom and almost won. The queen who lost the throne but birthed a dynasty. In the end, Matilda didn't need a crown. She built an empire from the shadows.